Hi Challenge B, this is a Latin lesson on indirect questions. It starts on page 280 in your book. And last week we learned about direct questions. And direct questions is just a question that is asked directly. And so let's look at the difference between a direct question and an indirect question. So here's a direct question, is God good? And then similarly, an indirect question says, I ask whether God is good. So with indirect questions, they depend on a verb of asking or saying or thinking. Also, another difference is that a direct question ends with a question mark and an indirect question ends with a period. Okay, so another thing that you need to know about indirect questions, well, first of all, the main clause is, I ask, and then I ask what? Whether God is good. So this is a subordinating clause. It's a noun clause, and the whole thing is being used as a direct object. Okay. Now, when we need to talk about primary tenses, and we have talked about this a little bit before, but if the main clause is in either the present, future, or future perfect, then the subordinating clause is going to be either in the present or in the perfect. And the way you know which to use, whether the present or the perfect, is if the action in this subordinating clause is happening at the same time as the main clause, then you use the present. But if the action is happening before the main clause, then you use the perfect. So in this sentence, I ask whether God is good. This is good is happening at the same time as I ask, so we would use the present. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a little bit of translating here. All right, and there's a new verb that you're going to learn this week, and it is the verb for I ask, and it is rogo. So I ask is rogo. And this word whether, you can translate it either by putting an NE at the end of the verb or by using the word num. Okay, we'll go ahead in this case, we're going to use NE at the end of the verb. That's how we'll translate whether. So let's go ahead. Since we know I ask is in the present, and that is a primary tense, and because this action is happening at the same time as the action here, we know that this is going to be in the present tense. And just like we've learned in the past for a subordinating clause, the mood is always going to be in the subjunctive. So let's make a note of that here. This is going to be subjunctive. Okay. So let's go ahead and translate God. That's going to be Deus. And good here is going to be bonus. So those are easy. So we just need to translate that is, and we know all of the being verbs are irregular. So if we look at the subjunctive, it's present. God is third person, and we know that it's singular. So if we look in our grammar book, we see that the verb is sit. And because we are going to use the NE to translate whether, we're going to put the NE right in there. So we could leave that sitney here, or we could put it over here. But basically we have rogo, deus, sitney, bonus. Actually, let's put the sitney over here, so that bonus is right next to deus. So rogo, sitney, deus, bonus. Okay, so that's one example. Let's do another example. And this one is Caesar asks, Caesar asks whether the soldiers are fighting. Okay, so right away we see that we have this Caesar asks and we have a period. So this is an indirect question. The main clause is Caesar asks, and the subordinating clause is whether the soldiers are fighting. Caesar asks, we see that's in the present tense. And this is whether the soldiers are fighting, which is happening at the same time as Caesar asking. So we're going to put this verb in the present tense. And we know that this subordinating clause is going to be in the subjunctive mood. So we'll make a note of that here too. Okay, this time when we translate whether, instead of putting the any at the end of the verb, I'm going to go ahead and use num. So you see that example. So num. And we know the soldiers is militis. We know Caesar is Caesar. Okay, and asks, we learned from the last sentence that it's the verb rogo, but this time it is Caesar asking, so that would be third person. So the ending is rogat. All right, so Caesar, rogat, nu militis. Now we just need to translate this verb over here. And we know that fighting is pugno. So let's go ahead and put our stem here. Oops, not. All right, pug. All right, now we need to have the right ending. Soldiers, that's third person, and it is plural. So if we look up subjunctive, it's present, it's also active, third person plural, and we know that pugno is a first conjugation verb. We see that the ending is ENT, and that's grammar number 194. Okay, and that's it. So Caesar rogat num militis pugnent. Okay, now just so that you have a comparison, let's make this whether the soldiers were fighting and see how it changes. All right, so here, the action in the subordinating clause happens before the action of the main clause. And because this is in a primary tense, we are going to put the subordinating clause in the perfect tense. And we know that when we build verbs in the perfect system, we use the third principal part. So I'm going to write down the third principal part, pugna, and then we're going to look up our new ending. It's perfect, and it is still subjunctive, it's still third person plural. And if you look that up, the ending is erint, and that is from Grammar 200. Okay, so here's two examples for you, and have fun with your exercises.